Welcome to The Classical Mind, a podcast about the great books in the Western tradition. We're your hosts. I'm Father Wesley Walker,
And I'm Dr. Junius Johnson.
and we're very excited to have a special guest today, Dr. Grace Hamman, who has her PhD from Duke University and is an independent scholar focusing on late medieval poetry and contemplative writing. She's written some really incredible books: Ask of Old Paths, Medieval Virtue and Vices for a Whole and Holy Life, and Jesus Through Medieval Eyes, Beholding Christ with Artists, Mystics, and Theologians in the Middle Ages. She also has a great Substack called Medievalish and hosts the podcast Old Books with Grace, where, like us, she reads and discusses old books. So we thought this would be a really fun opportunity for us to kind of join forces and discuss an old book. Grace, how are you?
I'm so glad to be here. This is so fun. I hadn't cracked open this book in a long time, and it was so fun to return to it. So delightful.
That's actually one thing we like to do kind of at the beginning is maybe talk through a little bit of our personal experiences with the text. So, when was your first encounter with The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde?
I was trying to remember when I first encountered this book, and I'm pretty sure that I was in middle school. I went through a huge phase where I was reading like anything that was mentioned in another book, like any classic that had like a lot of people were referencing it. I wanted to know, I wanted to be on the in of what it was. And so I'm pretty sure that this was in that season where I was reading like a ton of Charles Dickens and like anything that was like classic with a capital C. And Oscar Wilde, Importance of Being Earnest came up. And so I read that and really thought it was funny. Also, probably honestly missed a lot of the jokes because I was like, 13 or whatever. And then that was around the same time that the adaptation starring Colin Firth came out, and my friends and I saw that in the theaters and just thought it was hilarious. And so it's such a fun play.
It absolutely is. And I think even reading it as an adult, every time I pick it up, there are jokes that I did not pick up on
Yes.
before. It's kind of one of those multifaceted texts in that way. Junius, you kind of have the opposite experience with the text, or sort of anyway. So what about you? Have you encountered
Yeah.
this text
So
before?
I first encountered this text. It was performed when I was in college. And so the university theater troupe did it, and I went to see it. I want to say that we might have even had an English club event with them where we did a sort of pre-play discussion. And so I would have gone to see the dress rehearsal so that I'd get a sense for how they were doing it and whatnot. And then we did the discussion, and then I stayed and watched the play. But I hadn't read it, and this was my first time reading it. I've seen it again since then. I don't remember if it was the movie version I saw or another stage production, but I know I've seen it a couple times, but I'd never read it before. And so it was really, I was eager to see how it would hold up on paper because I really enjoyed it on stage. And to anticipate a little bit, it's even better because it is so densely packed with jokes that you kind of need that some time to, and it goes by so quickly, and I think it ought to go by quickly on the stage. And so you need some time to kind of sit and ponder things because it's just every line almost is just hilariously some crazy reference or some shot at somebody or something like that.
No, it really is fantastic. It's interesting. So, a brief, if you'll allow me, an excursus into a behind the scenes connection for our listeners. I'm a pastor in Annapolis, Maryland, and we have a local group called the Elliott Society. And the Elliott Society does these events where they want to kind of connect Christians and the arts. And so both Grace and Junius have been to my church to speak because we love to partner with the Elliott Society. And it's actually the Elliott Society through which I had really my first encounter with the importance of being earnest. I have encountered it in places gone by. I knew kind of the story, but I don't really remember the first time that I would have done that. But they actually hosted a reading in the living room of the couple who runs the Elliott Society. So we were each assigned characters. I was assigned Canon Chasuble, somewhat typecast, I suppose. Um, and the lady who played the aunt was just incredible for it. She should play it on a stage because she was so good. And so it was a great time. And hearing the jokes read out loud and kind of in a community setting rather than just by myself, I think was so, it just made it come alive in a way that was really exciting. So it was fun to reread, but I kind of missed reading it with that group of people because I thought it was so fun.
Mm.
That's such a cool idea for encounter because I think this play works for that in particular because it is so funny and packed in with the jokes.
That's
Like
right. And not long. It's short. I mean, it's
it's
kind of to the
short,
point.
yeah.
It's light, so it's not like a lot of
Mhm.
other Victorian plays that are very serious and offering all sorts
Yes.
of political commentary or social commentary. It's like pretty, in fact, that was kind of one of the criticisms about it, I think, when it came out, was this really isn't about anything.
Yeah. It's like the
The original
Seinfeld
Seinfeld.
of Victorian England. Like very funny, very like, what are these people doing? Are they real? Are they not real? I don't know.
In fact, that is kind of the genre of it. I think it's called a drawing room play. And it was
Mm.
kind of, they were just sort of bored, these kind of aristocratic class people, and they would put on these little kind of amateur productions in their drawing rooms for their families, and it kind of developed into a genre, um, in which they would maybe face characters would face certain cultural problems in a sort of comedic or farcical manner. But Wilde really sort of perfects it here, I think.
Mm.
He's kind of we don't read a lot of other drawing room plays. I mean, there are some, but we don't really give it the attention that the importance of being earnest gets.
Well,
No.
and it makes a lot of sense because not, if you think about what's required from the standpoint of properties, from the props you need to put it on, it's nothing is required that wouldn't be in your drawing room, right? Your tea
Yeah.
service and things like that.
Muffins.
Yeah, right. So it'd be really easy to
Cucumber
do.
sandwiches.
The scenes are very simple. There's only three real scenes, and this sort of the apartment in London, the garden in the countryside, and then interior in the countryside, and that's it. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting play as well because the Victorian era is not like particularly known for its plays, I feel
Mm,
like. So this is kind of an interesting artifact in its own sense because you're about to head into a season with a lot more like plays that we still read and perform today. But from this era, and I'm not like a play, like a drama expert by any means. This is one of the few plays that I feel like we still read at all from this era,
yeah.
like
I
frequently. I
I
mean,
think this
experts.
play, I read somewhere where maybe one critic said this is the most quoted play outside of Hamlet in the West.
Really? I mean,
Yeah.
I guess that's not so there's some very famous lines in here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's interesting because it doesn't even really match all that well with a lot of Wilde's own playwriting, because he did develop an interest in the theater, but originally his plays were somewhat serious, and maybe a little darker. And then he did kind of towards the end of that part of his career, he did shift to doing these drawing room plays. I think this is the last in a sort of quadrilogy of drawing room plays, but again, nobody seems to really be talking about the other ones that he did. This one kind of stands out.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think the only other one I've had more contact with is Lady Windermere's Fan. You hear about
Yep.
that one sometimes, but even that is not, it's not at all like this one.
No.
Yeah.
That
I've heard about it, but I've never seen it.
yeah,
You
same. And
know.
I don't think I've read it either. Like I've
Yeah,
been like, oh,
exactly.
I know that name. I've heard
Yeah.
it before.
There's a good zig when everybody's zagging is put on that show instead of the importance of being earnest.
That's right.
Maybe we could just say a brief word about the history of the play before we jump into the actual material of the play. It was first performed February 14th, 1895 in London, and it's interesting because this play has a lot of bearing on Oscar Wilde's unfolding life story. So,
Mm.
for those who may not be familiar with his life, he had a lover named Lord Alfred Douglas, who actually worked with Wilde some and even translated some of his work from French into English. And his father, the Marquis of Queensberry, was really angry about their relationship and even unsuccessfully planned to show up at the premiere and throw a bouquet of rotten vegetables at Wilde at the conclusion of the play. So they really didn't get along. And the relationship kind of escalated in terms of uh, negative interactions that they had. And um, Wilde actually sued the Marquis for libel because the
Mm,
the Marquis had basically publicly accused him of being a sodomite. And the problem with that, of course, is that if you prove the accusation, then you don't win. Then if the defendant proves the accusation, then you can't win the lawsuit, and you get opened up to possibly being countercharged. And so that's exactly what happened. Wilde was followed by private detectives who were able to gather the evidence to kind of prove that he had been engaging in illegal activities. Probably if this happened today, it still would have been problematic because a lot of this involved younger men who were not of age. And so he was found guilty and he actually went to prison for a couple of years in England and then was, of course, exiled to France, where he ended up dying of meningitis. Though, interestingly, it seems as though he experienced a deathbed conversion to the Catholic Church. Um, he has a great quip about that where he says that Anglicanism is for respectable people, but the Catholic Church is for sinners. I think it's one of his great quips. But anyway, so I thought that was really interesting that this play kind of is emerges in that context in his life, that period of his life, but also then becomes the impetus for kind of everything that would come after, the sort of decline that he would
Mhm.
experience. And so, yeah, that makes it interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of the kind of jarring things about reading Oscar Wilde's plays, or at least this one, is that his life outside of the play is taking a very tumultuous turn and is
Mm.
in kind of a downward spiral in so many ways. And you read this play and it's so funny and so lighthearted and so operating on a completely different level that it can feel very dissonant sometimes to read if
Mhm.
you know what's going on behind the scenes, you know?
That even seems true about his life in general, or at least maybe his wit in general. Like, even if you go, I've not read all of the, transcripts of the trial. We have a lot of it, but um he is funny on the stand. Like he's making
Yeah.
jokes at the prosecuting attorney and like um had the whole courtroom is erupting in laughter and all these kind of things. So even in the midst of him on trial, he's still like kind of throwing it out. And he kind of makes the argument at one point in the trial that he sort of misunderstood that he's not in the right time, that
Mhm.
later he'll be understood, but now he just isn't. It's not possible in his context for him to be sort of understood and appreciated. And there is a sense in which that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it is interesting. Whenever I read Wilde, um, he has such a even when he's being incisive and incisively critical, and we see some of that incisive wit in this play, there's always a kind of joy behind it that is, I think, one of the reasons why he's stuck around. He has all of the same hangups in many ways and same criticisms that later modernist writers will have, but he has it without the bleakness. Even
Yes.
in the midst of potentially bleak circumstances himself, he still has this outlook that is able to he's just able to laugh at himself. He doesn't take himself too seriously.
Hmm. It's been interesting. I think what you're saying, Junius, kind of maps onto what we're experiencing now. Like, I feel like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, like late night TV still had that kind of outlook. It was still
Hmm.
somewhat joyous. It was able to
Hmm.
critique and poke fun at, contemporary figures and events.
Hmm.
But now it seems that there's an edge in it that we've lost that kind of outlook. I
Yeah.
don't find it as funny anymore. And some of it is like it's hard
Yeah.
to make jokes about some stuff that's going on when it's already a
Yeah.
joke. But it's still it feels like maybe we've lost it.
That's it. I mean, I think that Jon Stewart's a really good example of this, because when I watch clips of him, he seems bitter,
Mm.
and
Mm.
there's an edge to his humor now, and I think that a lot of that is due to personal suffering. That as they have been put in the spotlight, as they've had their shows threatened and canceled and things like this, all of them as a group have come out the other side of it different. And that's understandable. Understandable is different than defensible, but it's understandable. And I think that highlights all the more the fact that Oscar Wilde, facing similar types of, cultural cancellation, was
Mhm.
able to maintain that levity and didn't descend into a sort of just bitter witticism.
Mm.
So yeah, readers. I mean, it's all the stuff that we said about the context of the play. It actually serves in many ways more to make the play more perplexing than to illuminate it. Because whatever you would expect to find coming out of all that stuff Father Wesley was just saying, that's not what you find here. You find this incredibly delightful romp, really.
And
Yes.
and it's even more confounding with the fact when you do look at it in light of his literary trajectory,
Mm,
he the idea of the double life is something that comes out in a lot of his works, like the Picture of
mm,
Dorian Gray, for example, and but in a lot of his preceding works, that double life is like a negative or something to be grappled with. There's a
Mm,
crisis because of it. In
hmm.
this, it's kind of laughed off.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is a true comedy, like both in the like old-fashioned sense of that it ends with marriages, it ends with the tensions being resolved in the marriages, or maybe not even resolved, but laughed over in
Mm,
a marriage, right? That's
hmm.
at this level that it's operating at. Um, and that's where Bunburying goes to, and then Bunburying's over, and that's
Yeah.
just the way it is. And there's the so many hilarious lines about I will never tell the truth to you on purpose again, or whatever it is from from Algie. So there's still that nod and that wink at this like truth telling, authenticity, living in a but it's all very humorous and very funny rather than this like threat to relationship or whatever as it is in Dorian.
Hmm.
Yeah, one of the moments that stood out to me all the way back from that first time that I watched it across the, unspecified number of years since then is that the moment when the governess comes in and the, the fancy society lady says, Prism, where's that baby? And there's this moment of, uh-oh, my comedy is suddenly taking a dark turn.
Hmm.
There's this missing child and and this tragic story of what happened and lost the baby and I've had to go and hide in the country for the shame of it and all this other sort of thing. But with, very quickly, and the reader gets there faster than the characters on stage do, very quickly you realize that no, this is actually the Deus Ex Machina that's going to make it possible for us to have the happy ending that's been complicated in Act Two. And so even at that moment when I remember very clearly that feeling of um, being unsettled and that feeling of foreboding of, uh-oh, this is suddenly getting deadly serious. This is turning into what I would have expected from Oscar Wilde. And it's actually quite the opposite.
Hmm.
Yeah. Miss Prism is a hilarious. I mean, they're all hilarious characters,
They
but
are.
the whole back and forth about the handbag and like what the handbag is over the baby, like let's talk about the handbag and spend lines on the handbag is so classically this play. Like here's
Yeah.
this serious thing that could go very south. No, let's talk about the handbag and discuss the handbag forever.
Right. So I was texting with Father Wesley as I was reading this, because it's just one of the most enjoyable things I've read in a long time. And I was laughing out loud so much that my wife kept telling me, okay, read me the line. Like, tell me what it is. Let's have it. What are you laughing at? Um, I just, I don't know how to recommend this strongly enough because I just had so much fun reading it. It's not that it's the greatest play in the history of the world or the most important book or any of those things. It's just incredibly fun. And I'd be hard pressed to find a more fun book I've read in the last several years.
So maybe we could talk about the theme of the book, which actually Wilde articulates for us in a letter. He
Mm,
explains what the theme is, and I think through that theme we can maybe talk about some specific cases in the story, but also just kind of the theme as it may apply to us today. So here's what he says: we should treat all trivial things in life very seriously, and all
mm,
serious things in life with a sincere and studied triviality. And so
interesting.
I think that's a fascinating quote, and I there it seems like there's some wisdom in that. But what does it really mean? What does it mean to treat a kind of insignificant thing as serious, while serious things as trivial? Um, I don't know. What does that look like? What is it? I suppose his life is maybe one example of that. He certainly is good at doing that, but I don't know. Can we really go through the world and do that?
Well, I suppose the advisability of such a course of action would depend a great deal on the extent to which we have correctly or incorrectly identified which things are actually in themselves serious and trivial.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if we've got a pretty good beat on what's actually serious, I think that to treat it with a studied triviality would be a bit of a transgression.
Hmm.
But I take him to be saying that I think this is consistent with other things I've seen in him, that we tend to treat the wrong things as very serious.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
so it's a bit like, I'm going to go to Father Wesley's favorite author here. It's a bit like a sort of Nietzschean transvaluation of values, in which everything that's good has been called bad and everything that's been called bad is good. Or like even in my own work, this notion that fairyland turns everything upside down because the world we live in is upside down and it's actually showing us the world the right way around again. I feel like that's more what he's after, right? And so I think that's the truth of it, is that there is a great deal of misidentification of what is trivial and what's serious, and we've got to get over that. I wonder if there's not another aspect of the truth of it as well, which is that it's something about our sense of, okay, so if this is really a serious matter, then we think that determines how we need to approach it. Therefore, it requires dour faces and, all these other hush tones and whatever else. And he wants to say maybe serious things can be not only approached in that way, but that some aspects of their seriousness can only be unlocked by approaching them differently.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. I think both those questions are good questions because I think that's part of the joke of the play, right? Is that
Mm,
it's like the women are so hung up on the name Ernest
Hmm.
that's right.
and the that's your Christian name, that's what you were christened, and I can't marry anyone who's not named Ernest, and it's very silly. And meanwhile, they're talking about marriage, which is obviously considered by most to be a very serious thing. And so there's that play in that joke already. And yeah, and it is that question of like I think Wilde is always dealing with some level of satire, of course, and he's thinking about the ways that people make marriage and choose marriages and how it is a serious thing that does then become trivialized, but is that then like I think what is so tricky about Wild is that you then start to get really mixed up where you're like, wait, but what is being trivialized in a good way versus what is being treated as trivial in a way that should be serious, and why is that? And so I think he's messing with you, being like, is this serious thing which you purport to treat with seriousness, are you actually not trivializing it by the way you are treating it?
Mm,
And and so, therefore, would it be better if you went about it in a totally different way, where
yeah.
you get all twisted up and turned around in that? And so, I think
Mm,
there is a note, a thread of reality to these kinds of questions, where it is we sometimes get very silly in not good
mm,
ways when we talk about serious things.
mm,
Um, and maybe we need to take ourselves more lightly
mm,
versus getting hung up on names in this business of marriage, that being the part we take seriously.
yeah. What I like is that the characters in the play don't have to resolve that. They
No.
they, they get to just blithely take everything lightly or take the wrong things seriously or whatever else, and it's okay because they're characters in a play.
Yes.
But by doing so, they ask the viewers of the play or the readers of the play to think about, well, where are they getting that right and where are they getting it wrong, right? I mean, some things are fairly obvious. It shouldn't matter whether the guy's called Ernest or not, but other things are much less so. And the way that he moves seamlessly across those, I mean, here's like a few lines, they kind of give that sense. This is from Act One. Um, Algernon says, so Jack has just said that, my dear Algie, is the whole truth, pure and simple. And Algernon says, the truth is rarely pure and never simple. That sounds quite important and quite profound. Then he says, modern life would be very tedious if it were either, and modern literature a complete impossibility, which is funny from you're reading it in a piece of modern literature. To which Jack replies, that wouldn't be at all a bad thing. And Algernon says, literary criticism is not your forte, my dear fellow. Don't try it. You should leave that to people who haven't been at a university. I think the way that he moves so effortlessly through this, okay, the truth is never pure and rarely simple. Wow, that's really profound, and that's you could take that very seriously in life too. Yeah, but literary criticism. I mean, no one who's been to a university has any business doing literary criticism. You know too much to you might actually say something germane to the question, and so it becomes an indictment of the entire project of literary criticism. Shortly after he said that modern literature would be an impossibility if truth were of this sort.
Hmm.
I was thinking of that line too when Wesley was quoting that letter because it seems to be the same kind of piece of the puzzle. Um, you begin, and this is so Oscar Wilde. You make a very profound statement, like the truth is rarely pure and never simple, and then it disintegrates into this very funny, very silly commentary on people who are trying to be really serious about it.
Mm. Hmm.
Um, and it's, I think, meant to poke holes in your ego,
Yeah.
and call into question the whole thing of like, well, here we are doing this very serious literary endeavor at a very serious institution, and yet all the time we are just puffing ourselves up with air, and actually being very silly. And I think that's what Wilde is so good at, amongst many other things, is poking holes in these over bloated things that then we pride ourselves on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Another good example, very close to that, is talking about dinner. I hate people who are not serious about meals. It's so shallow of them. Like it's kind of, it reminds me of Bilbo's thing to the hobbits about like less than half twice as much. And you're like, so what? Wait, what does that really mean? You spend this time. That's why I like reading it, because I had time to stop and puzzle over some of the things and think, what is that? What does he really mean by that?
And in some ways, he's right, right? Like, I mean, to share a meal, to eat, like that is kind of what it is about, you know? But we
Hmm.
often treat
Yeah.
it like it's not important. Oh, I'll just grab something, it doesn't matter. And all these little things are so important and they're piling up. And so I have to give my full attention and treat those with all seriousness and then kind of, avoid or see meals as utilitarian. And there is a sense in which, yeah, that is an inverse of probably how it should be.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that generates what I would call the Oscar Wilde whiplash. And it's a whiplash of, wow, that's really profound. And then the next second, you're like, whoa, hang on a second, that was total nonsense. And you're constantly getting jockeyed between these things.
Yes.
And I have to think that a big part of the reason for that is to keep you either on your toes and off your balance, right?
Yes.
And so I think what I experience as the play goes on is that the division between things that are very profoundly said and things that, well, that mean very profoundly and things that mean very flippantly begins to, I won't say it shrinks, but maybe it begins to seem less important. That I begin to feel like, hang on, if I really want to get serious about parsing all this stuff out, I'm going to have to go back quite a long way and revise quite a lot of presuppositions. And so now I've got a choice. I can try to get involved in that work and do that, or I can let all that go and just ride the wave of enjoyment. And I think the play, and this is pretty rare in my experience, that the play doesn't really judge you for either choice. It just,
Yeah.
it's not like Rilke, who's so, you must change your life. He's like, I mean, you probably should change your life, but it's up to you. Like, if you don't want to change your life, we can keep eating cakes.
Yeah. Have either of you watched the show Arrested Development?
Oh yeah, that's a great show.
One of
Just a
my
bit.
favorite shows. And I think now, like reading this, I go, this feels a lot like Arrested Development to
Yes, it
me,
does.
Mhm.
where the jokes are hilarious and they build on each other, and there's a thread that is constantly building. And then at any moment, it can collapse on you, and you're
Mm,
the butt of the joke.
mm,
And that's how, like what you were just saying, Junius, this kind of like backlash or whiplash kind of, um, you can't, and then also equally, the lack of judgment on the part of the maker, as far
mm.
as, yeah, you're caught in this too, and you better be able to laugh at yourself, whichever way you end up going, because that's the freedom it's opening up to you.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
like this opportunity to be like, this is all really silly, and you can enjoy the silliness, and also you're indicted in the silliness too,
yeah.
which is really
And
interesting.
you don't feel that the author himself has escaped. There's the
No.
sense that he knows he's caught up in the same contradictions and
Yes.
trivialities that you are, and excessive seriousnesses, and so he's not preaching at you. He's just calling a spade a spade. Aren't we silly creatures after all?
One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is the actual earnestness of the title.
Mm,
So of course it's the name Ernest, and that plays a big part in it. But um, this it's obviously a play on the word earnestness, and Victorian culture. This sort of is their controlling idea, right? To be
mm,
earnest is what we should all strive to be. I know certainly in the Anglican Church at this time, it's the evangelical class, at least, or the evangelical camp that's sort of the main way in which the upper class are worshiping, and
mm,
it's that striving for earnestness that you find in those circles. And so, why is that a value to kind of poke fun at? I mean,
mm.
it's wrapped up, I think, in some of what we've already talked about, but clearly Wilde is kind of he wants to mock it, to kind of make it a farce. Why?
Mhm.
I think part of it is in the Victorian era, if you read the big novels of the Victorian era, so you pick up an Anthony Trollope novel, or you pick up a Thackeray, you pick up Vanity Fair, um, and you have these central characters like Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair, who, or you could go further back and go to Dickens, and again you see a conflict between the idea of art and like the artificiality of art, and then
Mhm.
this kind of like pure, earnest, direct, straightforward soul. And so you have a Becky Sharp versus an Amelia. And that kind of comparison, and this is like a very gendered thing as well. It comes out with
Mhm.
questions like women who paint their faces, who rouge their faces, or all throughout the Victorian era, there's this real tension and this real sense of what is art can also be artificial, which is a danger to the earnestness, to this kind of new reforming mentality of a lot of Victorian culture, to things that now we would like kind of be like, oh, I feel really weird about how they're going about this. So like in colonialism, this comes up a lot. All these different questions, and what I think then this next wave of late Victorian and Edwardian thinkers are starting to do is go, this line isn't as clearly defined as you guys all told us it was. And Thackeray's
Mm,
already beginning to do that a little bit, but this question of where does the real begin, which is such a
mm,
modern question, right? That's like kind of
mhm,
at the core of modern anxiety and modern, where am I really real? Like, what is
mhm,
real about me? What has been culturally imposed upon me? What is artifice? What is art?
mhm,
Can art ever not be artificial?
mhm,
These are the questions that drive a huge and very um, intensely sort of anxious undercurrent in the Victorian era, and it's going to come out even more and more and more as we go into the 20th century.
mhm,
And so Wilde is picking up characters like these in these big classic Victorian novels and skewering this idea that you can have this kind of pure-hearted, sweet soul like in a Dickens novel, and then this conniving art-driven, artificial counterpoint or foil to them. And so that's one thing that's really interesting. And what that kind of leads into is then this question of, well, can there be an authenticity that's not in some sense put on? And this
mm,
is an ancient question in Christianity, of course, is like when you are trying to be good, trying to practice virtue, is that going to be artificial? Can it become part of your character? Is it all just an artifice to say you're good? And then you see that in different currents in theology of people who want to just say, no, it's only you are only truthful if you are in a fully confessional mode. I am just a piece of dirt, da 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 da. And then there are others who are like, no, you can grow, you can change. You can practice things and try to get better at them, and that's not works righteousness. That can be held in grace too. So this is all like a very deep level conversation happening that Wilde is then bringing to this kind of utmost extreme of ridiculousness with
mm,
Earnest as this tension tipping point of, can you even be earnest? Is it possible to be earnest? turns out neither of the main characters are earnest, though they say they are. And so
Well,
it,
actually, one of them is, as it turns out.
that's right. That's where it flips back, right? As you were pointing out, Judy, is the constant flip back where you
Yeah.
think you can land firmly on one side and you think he's saying everyone's fake, nothing, nothing is going to be earnest, but then it turns out somebody really is earnest
He's
in a
been
very
earnest the whole
literal
time.
way.
And
He
that's
was
that's
earnest and
kind of
didn't even know it.
that's kind of an interesting parallelism in the play itself, right? Is the difference between Jack and Algernon, where at one point they are almost the same in that they both assume this fake identity that kind of gets them in trouble. Um, Whereas Algernon kind of returns to just being himself
Hmm.
at the end.
Yes.
He just
Hmm.
he apologizes. Shouldn't have done. Not really apologizes. He gets found out, and the women decide to forgive them, and so they just move on. But he just is Algernon, whereas Jack becomes someone else. But it's not through anything he does. It's kind of imposed on him. He's thrown into it, I guess, to use the Heideggerian, terminology. Is like it's just something that happens to him. He can't control it. He's kind of the passive recipient of all this. Even though I guess in his agency he has brought it about in some way, but not on purpose. It wasn't an intended consequence. So it's
Well,
very
and,
interesting.
and even, I mean, one thing that's fascinating about the ending is that we see that Jack is the path is clear for his marriage. We don't see the same thing for Algernon's, although we know that he's already got the appointment for the christening. He's just got to go and get that done, and then everything will be fine. Even though he is the one least eligible for a christening because he has in fact been christened before. But if he intends to stay on this path that he's put himself on, then he doesn't in fact go back to being Algernon because he wants to live earnest going forward. That is to say, to stop Bunburying and settle down with Cecily. So there's that. There's also that kind of a he's we only get the play ends one marriage sooner than it would for a proper comedy because even though everything's in place for both couples to wind up together, we don't actually close the loop on the second couple that they wind up together. And both men can say that they realize the importance of being earnest, the final line of the play, but only one of them has actually attained to being earnest at the end of the play. And he was the one who, it seems to me, was well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say he seemed more earnest at the beginning, but actually, I think there's a way in which you have to sort of Oscar Wilde that and say that Algernon was actually the more transparent of the two at the beginning. They're both leading double lives, and Algernon is blithely and comfortably in line with that, whereas the other hasn't really problematized his double life yet. And so he's sort of not actually by acting more earnest because he's got all the sort of expected moral responses and things, he comes across less earnest over the in terms of what he's actually doing. I also want to throw out there because several and it began with Oscar Wilde's own statement of the theme, and that bit about a studied triviality, I think was his word. And this reminds me of Castiglione and the courtier, the sense of the courtier's got to have a sprezzano, which is a studied disaffection. He's got to act as if he's got to make hard stuff look easy, right? If it looks like you're trying too hard,
Mhm.
that's going to be a negative feature socially. And so the really good courtier makes everything look easy and like he doesn't matter that much to him. And so I feel like some of that's in the background of what Wilde is pointing at with the play. But there's also been several times throughout that I feel like the characters themselves are sort of raising that question. You were talking, Grace, about artifice and artificiality. When does art cross over into artifice? And of course, this is also an ancient discussion. If you notice the artifice of the art, it ceases to be as desirable as art. The idea is for the form to be so integrated to what's going on that it doesn't draw your attention. It's maybe not transparent. That's maybe a little too romantic, but at least translucent, so
Mhm.
that you get past it quickly. I think a lot of that is at stake here. And one of the things that drew my attention about this question Wesley's pointing us to is the title of the play spells earnest like the adjective, but the name is spelled without the additional A. And so the even the central pun around which the whole thing turns is off by a letter.
Which is interesting because it would have been impossible to know that as an audience
Yeah,
member.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's just like Oscar Wilde being Oscar Wilde by
yeah,
himself.
yeah.
Yeah, it made him laugh, and that's what matters.
That's right. I have that feeling though. I mean, I know that Barry is a little later than this, J.M. Barrie, but when I read J.M. Barrie's plays, there's so much in the stage direction that I don't know how you could convey to an audience. That to me
Hmm.
seems so material to the play itself. We'll circle back around in one of these future seasons and do Dear Brutus, and you'll see what I mean. But the to me that says on the one hand that there's a very conscious awareness that the play has become a literary form, that more people might read it than see it on stage.
Mm.
And I'm wondering if Oscar Wilde is already at the early stages of that, in the beginnings of that, where he's thinking, yeah, this is the people who are performing this in the drawing room. Of course, if most people are encountering it in the drawing room, then most people are seeing the script. And so I can do some things that maybe won't translate to the action, but that nevertheless are part of the canonical play, as it were.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think he's such a word person. He's such a
Hmm.
wordsmith that I think he is thinking about those things even
Yeah,
when it wouldn't reach the surface, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah,
I think he's always playing around with that, and he's interested in that question of artifice versus art because he is so. That's one of the things that you see throughout his writing. Say in Dorian, for instance, art is one of the most serious things in the world to him. That he then trivializes with plays like this, but there's
hmm,
that deep seriousness underneath of what is art, what is artificial,
yeah,
what it, when a person is describing themselves and using a name, what's in their name, what relationship has that to who they are? And obviously, it's all a joke here, but the questions are still the real questions,
yeah.
right?
That's right. Yeah, in Dorian, art is literally a matter of life and death.
Yes.
And here, I mean, one thing you could say this play is about is nominalism.
Mm.
Does a name carry anything more with it than the sound? Back to Juliet's question, which is actually not a hard question to answer in the context of Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? What's in a name is everything that keeps you apart from Romeo,
Yeah.
actually. Right? She can claim that a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet, but the reality is they wind up dead because the names matter. And this play is us sort of asking that question, well, how much can you put in a name? And isn't it silly to put too much in a name? But even the one letter difference between earnest and earnest, which is only available encountering the story in a certain way, raises the question of, but wait, which is real? The play on the page or the play as performed? And I love that about him, that he's able to be so funny and delightful, but at the same time, all of those questions that have exercised the best philosophical minds of the West for centuries and millennia are all just churning right there,
Yeah.
Hmm.
like a trap.
Yes. Oh, reading him is like reading Chaucer, who's
Mm,
always wanting to trap his reader in the humor.
yeah,
You're always going to step on a landmine in Chaucer. You're going to get in trouble yourself, and he's going to laugh at you, and you better learn to laugh at yourself too, or
yeah,
else it won't be fun for anyone. And Wilde's
yeah,
like that in a different mode, in a different way, but that same trickiness, slipperiness, language itself is slippery, the spelling is all those things are
hmm,
um, potential places where you can either laugh or you can get upset that he's not giving you a straight answer, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. So maybe to close the circle back to where we were when Father Wesley read that quote about what the play's about. I know that I personally immediately heard that it was serious and trivial and treating them with the opposite disposition and whatnot. I immediately heard that about things outside of me, about big ideas and cultural movements and situations and things like that. And the play consistently turns that back around and says, "No, I'm talking about you. The things that you think are serious about you, you should probably treat trivially. And the things you think are trivial about you, those things you should take seriously." And
Mm,
once I stated that way, I'm like, oh crap, that sounds really, really urgent, actually.
that sounds really true too. Like
Yes, it
you can't
does.
that the way that the quote sounded you go, oh, do I believe that or not? But then when you do put it in that context, you go, oh, wow, that is like kind of brutally true,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, I take all the wrong things seriously. I have a great an example of this. Early in my marriage, my wife and I come from two different types of families, and one of the trivial, if you will, differences between our families was that in my family, it was someone's chore to do the dishes every night, and you knew who that was, and they had to do it, and they had to do it before they went to bed, right? So you had freedom to manage your evening, but as long as the dishes were done before you went to bed, you were good. Whereas in my wife's family, everyone together went into the kitchen and washed the dishes together and by hand and dried them and put them away, and nobody left the kitchen until it was done. Well, we never talked about this because it wasn't something that really came up when we were dating. And so all of a sudden we're married and we're both acting in the ways that seem natural to us, and it's turning into a problem, right? I remember reaching a point where I thought to myself, well, if I have to change the way that I do dishes, I don't even know who I am anymore. And as soon as I said that, by the grace of God, I laughed at myself. I was able to recognize, okay, if that's that important to who you are, then you need to change who you are. Like, that's not okay, right? That can't be that important to you. But that's something that I was suckered by the situation and taking so seriously about myself that I was about to die on that hill. When at the end of the day, I don't actually really care when the dishes get done. And so it's something I can very easily change on. And when I think about how many things like that I've learned through the years about myself, and how many more there probably are that I haven't seen yet, that's what makes that comment so biting. But the things that I think are trivial, like that I joke that thing away or whatever, those are probably the things that are most hurting the people around me, that are most damaging my own soul, that are ways in which I stand in my own way. It starts to really hurt.
Yeah,
Liturgy is a, oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna kind of jump off that and be like, I that rings so true to me. And I love that you use the example of the early years of your marriage because I think so much of the early years of your marriage is that process of be this thing that you thought was really trivial actually really bothers your spouse and vice versa. And so it's just a perfect example. But I was also thinking about how Wilde is a master of showing the art of self-persuasion on
Mm,
things.
mm,
And so you have the hilarious scene where the women are watching the men eat the
yes.
muffins. And they're saying, like, basically, look how contritely they're eating their muffins. They seem truly regretful. And they're just telling themselves a story about this muffin eating that fits this like big, lovely narrative that they want to be true,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And I think that is exactly what you're describing, where with serious things, we bend ourselves around them, and then with the trivial things, we we make them make sense according to what we want to be important, right? So we go,
Mhm.
that's trivial. That's actually not important in my way of thinking, in my way of living, whatever. Though, and that is something that Wilde is so good at showing us how we write these narratives and are so ready to believe them, and they're so silly
Yeah,
ultimately.
yeah. We all look as foolish as these characters do to anyone with a properly objective eye.
Yeah.
Father Wesley, what were you going to say about liturgy?
Oh, yes, I
Yeah.
was going to say
Tell us.
liturgy, I feel like is a good teacher for me on this topic. Marriage certainly is a great one as well. But I mean, there's a sense in which as a priest, on Sunday when you're celebrating the mass, you are in the person of Christ and you're supposed to represent God to the people and the people to God, and it is a very serious role, but of course none of us fill it perfectly. Sometimes some Sundays are more embarrassing than others, like you say these words and not these words, you miss this or
Mhm.
that, or you're not supposed to do that. And it can be real easy in the moment to kind of let that weigh on your shoulders of like, wow, I just messed up this really important, thing. And I'm not saying we should treat the liturgy flippantly, but there is something about stepping outside of yourself and kind of laughing at, oh yeah, I did that. Darn, I messed it up. Oh well, and just kind
Yeah.
of moving on rather than dwelling on it or taking it so seriously that your day's ruined because of it or something like that.
There's a theological point behind that comes down on the side of Oscar Wilde as well, which is that it's not that the if you make a mistake during the Eucharistic liturgy, it's not that the liturgy is not a serious thing or shouldn't be taken seriously or something like that, but you aren't so very serious, right?
Yes.
The way the liturgy works is that you are a validly ordained priest trying to perform the rite of the church in the way you're supposed to for the purpose of confecting the sacrament. And so that actually covers a multitude of your mistakes.
That's right.
And so the seriousness of the liturgy actually trivializes you in a way that frees you up from having to carry that weight. And Wilde introduces just enough space for us to begin to question the transitivity of the liturgy serious, and I'm the officer of the liturgy, then how important must I be? And it's like, well, not necessarily very,
That's right. That's right.
right? I mean, how important was Balaam's donkey when it was talking to him to deliver the word of God? I mean,
That's right.
important in the sense that God chose it to do that, but at the end of the day, it's a donkey. So you can't get too high on yourself if God uses you to do something,
That's right.
I like that. I think that feels very Oscar Wilde-y, where
right?
you're it's serious stuff. What's in a name? What is a marriage? What is culture? What is society? He's asking all these questions and kind of doing this zany stuff with it. And underneath, it's this real and abiding sense of the wonderful smallness of people doing
Yeah.
all these things.
Mm.
Yeah. The ladies convincing themselves that the men are truly contrite so that they can forgive them and move forward with the relationships, and then coming back around to, but there's still the insuperable obstacle of your names. That in many ways they can do that and treat that very seriously precisely because they know it's not a big obstacle to overcome.
Yes.
Because a person can be renamed. And so we can, I don't actually want to make the barrier that I won't move on something that truly can't be overcome because that's making a choice that I'm not actually trying to make.
Yes.
And so there's the kind of benefit of treating trifling things seriously is that then you can have this a trifling resolution to a serious matter, which is generally speaking what we all long for. If we have a major issue with the car or a house, or so we think, and then the person tells us, actually, it was this tiny small thing and it's only going to be $20, then that's a good day because the serious matter was resolved triflingly.
Mm.
Triflingly. I want to try an experiment in criticism though, if I can borrow Lewis's phrase. And that is, I want to see what it looks like to talk about this thing as if to take it deadly seriously.
Mm.
So to treat this light thing, this trivial play seriously for a second, and there's a lot of different directions we could go with that, but I'll start with this one. Um, what's really at stake in this play is the partners in the two relationships are jockeying for supremacy in the upcoming marriage. It's about who is, remember the wife of Bath. What do women want? They want to be in charge. They
Sovereign.
want to have control, right?
Sovereignty.
Sovereignty. And so the women, by imposing new names on the men, are claiming sovereignty, the right to name a thing within the marriage. And so that starts them off on the upper hand. The men are happy to do that, but only on their terms, in which there's this sense of, well, I've really always been earnest, and I'm just sort of expressing externally what was already true of me internally. And so, yes, I'm doing it for you because I'll do anything for you, but I'm the one choosing to do it for you, and I'm doing it in my way. And I'm doing it in such a way that you don't know that what you're asking for, I secretly already did and made that happen. Right. So there's one possible direction to go. And the reason I wanted to do the experiment is because what I find fascinating about us and fascinating and characteristic of Oscar Wilde is that when you do the experiment of treating him as if he's deadly serious, even though you know he can never be more than half serious, I think it still works really well.
I wonder, I think
Grace doesn't think so.
no, I do, I agree with you, but I think there are two things that well, there are two things. One is marriage in this play just generally doesn't go well, like actual marriages.
Yeah,
Courtship is one thing, marriage is
that's true.
another. The marriage we have in this play is Lady Bracknell, who clearly hates her husband and is, you know, they don't have any kind of a functioning relationship that is earnest in any way. They really
Mhm.
truly do not have an earnest relationship.
Yeah.
And that one wonders, right? Can there be an earnest marriage? I
Mhm.
mean, that I think that if you are taking Wilde at his utmost seriousness in this, you go, do they ever get beyond this flim flam little like fun, lighthearted romp that underneath there's a sort of vacant nothingness? I think that's what reading him at his most like dark and deadly serious what he is worried about, I think, too, to some extent, is do you reach the bottom? Do you reach Ernest? Like, can
Mhm.
you? Is that
Mhm.
even a thing? I think you see that in Dorian Gray as well, right? There's that same darkness underneath of like, is there anything outside the portrait? Can there be anything outside the portrait?
Hmm.
Um, is it all just a funny little drawing room comedy?
Yeah,
Or is there actually something substantive?
yeah,
Um, and I think that's where he get can go very, very, very modernist, right? Before his time, is that the modernists will go one way or the other,
yeah.
either early T.S. Eliot or old T.S. Eliot. Um, and so that's where I think I don't know what I can't decide. I can't decide what he's saying with
Yeah, yeah. I think that's right. So if we turn the experiment a different direction, then and so now it's not about the war of the sexes, but it becomes about let's maybe take the nominalism questions. It becomes about naming and to what
that.
extent a thing's name is expressive of its true nature, and to what extent a thing's name exercises any influence on its true character. There is this idea of earnest that the ladies have, and the gentlemen are so enamored of the ladies that they want to take on the name because the name is the sine qua non of being with the ladies. But in order to get to the name, they're prepared to also get to the reality. And so the name goes deeper than that. And so now what you have is the ladies, by holding on to ideals higher than those that are the norms within their society, would be laughed at in their society. What does it matter what his name is, dear girl? He's got 15,000 pounds a year, right? By holding on to those things, they're able to transform the characters, the male characters, morally, and
Mm,
offer to them an image they can then grow into in sanctification, becoming partners with helping them to be more truly not who they have always been, but who they always could have been. And then
mm,
you wind up at somewhere that is almost exactly the opposite to where the feminist reading got you, right? And I think that's the other aspect of the experiment in criticism is that I think it shows that if you take Oscar Wilde seriously, multiple readings are going to be really exciting, really plausible, and seem really grounded in the play, precisely because the whole point of being Oscar Wilde is that you get to talk out of both sides of your mouth at the same time. You
mhm,
don't have to resolve the contradictions if you're Oscar Wilde.
mhm.
All you do is juxtapose the contradictions. And in many ways, it's I love the connection to Chaucer that you made earlier, Grace, because for me, the key point about Chaucer is that Chaucer's a poet of mimesis. Everyone's always trying to say, is Chaucer trying to praise this or critique this or what's he doing with this? And I think fundamentally what he's doing is he's just showing you what's what. And he's comfortable letting that speak for itself. It's not because he doesn't care or have a moral stance on things. I think he's actually quite a devout man, but it's that he doesn't have to preach to you. All he has to do is just show you what's really going on, and the contradictions themselves will do the work. And I feel like
Mhm.
Oscar Wilde is in that same sort of space.
Mm. Interesting.
I suppose that plays into the role of farce just in general, right? It's not
Mm.
necessarily about offering some sort of large meta answer to some of the questions and contradictions, but simply to draw them out and to make us wrestle with them.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. And it is a shame, therefore, that on the reading lists that we make up of the great books of the Western tradition, there are not more comedies. And that
Yeah.
even where the comedies are present, they're tending to get de-emphasized, right? I mean, you may have a Utopia or Gulliver's Travels on the list, but how many people have it on the syllabus?
Yes. Or you only have Shakespeare,
Yeah,
Shakespeare comedy.
that's
That's it.
right. That's
Like
right.
that's the one representative. And while Shakespeare's comedies are incredible and everyone should read them,
Yeah,
he's doing something pretty different than Oscar Wilde is
yeah,
doing,
that's right.
or than Chaucer even is doing in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, and then when we do reach Chaucer, who is a very comic writer, um, he gets there's that bifurcation that comes. We got to treat him as either totally making fun of everything, which actually turns him into a very serious critic of the church and society and things like this, and so it takes the comedy out of it,
Hmm.
or we treat him as, very serious as a heart attack, which also is going to have the effect of losing the farcical, what the farce is there for. Because in
Yes.
medieval writers, and I think in Oscar Wilde for sure, farce is never just farce,
No.
but it doesn't have to be something other than farce to do more work than simply making fun of things.
Right.
Right?
That's
By being
true.
itself, it does that work.
That's true. And I think that is where Oscar Wilde feels medieval in those
Yeah.
ways, which
Yeah.
is such a surprising and funny comparison because you just
I
wouldn't
know,
think that
right?
off the top of your head. No.
Right?
But it is, he's laying them out. And I think that's why people get frustrated reading medieval authors is because they want, especially somebody like Chaucer or even William Langland's Piers Plowman is like this
Mm,
as well. You want the contradictions to stop contradicting each other, dang
that's
it,
right. Can
right?
you just
You're
resolve it?
like, why is it, how does this work together? And you're like, no, it's the fact that they don't work together. That's part of the point. Like
Yeah.
that you could read it either way, and that actually in itself is doing something, and that feels very Oscar Wilde.
Yeah. I would make a musical comparison here if folks know Gustav Holst's The Suite of the Planets. In Jupiter, which is one of the most famous of the of those planetary movements, Jupiter the bringer of jollity. And it's got this, very memorable melodies, couple several very memorable melodies, one of which we've turned into our hymn. Da 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 dee da 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 da. It's beautiful, it's harmonic, it's so deeply satisfying. At the end of that section, it doesn't resolve. Da 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 da. And then instead of coming back down where you expect it to, this piece kind of starts over again. And as a musician playing it, you're like, resolve. Just it's one note away. Let's just go. Let's do it. But that would completely change the flow and the meaning, the structure
Oh,
of that movement, right? And I think that's the desire for resolution is human, but the inability to actually affect the resolution is also human.
well
And that
said.
makes someone like Wilde really, really critical because he's naturally talented at showing the tension and he's dispositionally well placed not to resolve it.
Hmm. And he lived in a society that offered maybe an oversimplified
Yes.
resolution to these.
Yeah.
I
And
think
so,
that's a typical Victorian desire. I mean, all of us share, I think you're right that all of us share that very deeply. We really want things to be clear cut in particular ways. But Victorian society swung far more that way than the average time and place, I'd
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right.
well, this has been a ton of fun. I think probably based on where we're at, unless anybody has anything that we haven't talked about, I'd love to talk more about Miss Prism and Dr. Chasuble, but I think we're probably running a little low on time. So maybe it would be best to do our end notes.
Sounds good.
Grace, what do you have for us? What is your end note for the importance of being earnest?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Remind me what the end note is again.
Oh,
I know
yes, yes,
you
yes. So
told
at the
me,
end of each
but
episode, so here's what we'll do. Junius and I will go first, and we'll save the best for last. An
okay.
end note is anything from like pop culture, or any other sort of
Any
secondary
culture
source. It
really.
can be anything that kind of sheds light on the work. So it could be another book, it could be something else Wilde wrote, it could be an adaptation of The Importance of Being Earnest, or it could be, something kind of loosely based on it or something. So like when we did Inferno, I did a Hosier album called Francesca, which is about
Okay.
he goes
Oh,
through the different
nice.
levels, right? So it's that
Okay.
kind of thing. So
Yes,
we'll
got
let
it.
Junius go first. I'll go second, and so then that way you can be thinking about what you want your note to be.
I would say the whole project of endnoting these books is in some ways can be done in a very Wildean fashion because in many ways the endnote
Mhm.
offers you the opportunity to make a juxtaposition. And that
Yes.
juxtaposition can
I
be
love
look
that.
how similar these things are, or look how different they are, and like and yet they kind of speak to each other.
Yes.
I'm gonna go with I don't know about similar, but what I have is Oscar Wilde's fairy tales. He wrote a series of short fairy tales in his life. The three that I've spent a lot of time with are called The Happy Prince, The Nightingale and the Rose, and The Selfish Giant. These are all 3 or 4 pages long, and they are so deeply packed with meaning. They're very much moral fairy tales that are teaching a point. Very deeply spiritual, in fact, very consonant with Christian values. and with the sort of Christian way of looking at the world and human life, even though written at a time in his life when there's no reason to think that he had any sympathy, particular sympathy with that. They're just beautiful. They are appropriate for children, but they're best for adults because there's a lot to chew on and think about there. There's a lot of that, that wit is there. The way that it's criticizing, for example, in these Happy Prince, criticizing all the people of the town and the ways they're presented in very offhand statements. You can see their ridiculousness so quickly summed up, but it does it in the voice of a fairy tale and not in the voice of a play or a novel or something like that. So I think they're pretty obscure these days. And so if you haven't heard of these fairy tales, The Happy Prince, The Nightingale and the Rose, The Selfish Giant, do yourself a favor and take an hour and read them.
That's cool.
I like that.
Okay, so mine is going to be a contemporary example of Bunburying, which is the movie Ricky Stenicki, which stars Zac Efron and John Cena. And it's about a group of friends who, from childhood, invented a character named Ricky Stenicki, and they blame everything on him or use him as an excuse, you know. They all want to go see a concert, and they each have things going on. One has something going on at work. One's wife is about to have a baby, and so they say, "Oh, our friend Ricky, who lives in New York City, where this concert is, you know, he has had a relapse of cancer, so we have to go visit him." You know, so they all go to the concert instead. You know, the family starts to not believe that Ricky Stenicki's real, so they hire an actor, John Cena, to come play Ricky Stenicki in person, and they have this whole Ricky Stenicki Bible with the whole universe of Ricky Stenicki that they have to keep up with. It's a bit of a crude movie at times, but it's pretty funny and I think a good example of kind of what some of the dynamics at play in Earnest.
That's funny. Modern Bunburying. I like it.
Yep, somebody's got to do it. Why not
No,
Zac
and
Efron?
yeah, sure. That's fantastic. I know that I already mentioned it, but I just can't get it off my mind. I think that the modern equivalent, Arrested Development, if you haven't seen it, again, it can be crude sometimes, and it's definitely for adults, but this sense of the trivial and the serious getting so weirdly mixed up together, and people being bumbling fools both when they are trying to do something noble and when they are trying and when they are at their lowest and worst is such a theme, and the humor that comes out of that and the absurdity that comes out of that, and then this particular clever little layering of hidden things that you have to pay close attention to, that feels so Wildian to me, and I think it would make an excellent pairing, especially if you're like me and you really need some comedy in your life right now to lighten things up a bit. That's where I would go.
Mm.
I second that. Arrested Development, I think, is one of the greatest comedy TV shows ever written. It's great. Excellent. Well, Grace, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an absolute pleasure. We'll link to your Substack newsletter, your podcast as well in the episode. We encourage all our listeners to go check it out. And listeners, our next book will be A Midsummer's Night Dream. We'll be doing that next month. And then after that, we're starting a trilogy. We'll do Lord of the Rings, which I'm very excited about. So, Junius, prepare yourself.
You have my axe.
Excellent.
Thank you
Well,
so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was so fun.
It's been
absolutely.
amazing.
Anytime. You're always welcome. This has been great. And listeners, we'll see you next month. In the meantime, keep reading.